Good morning, everyone. I think we can start. It's wonderfully 9 a.m. and I have the pleasure to welcome you to that second day. My name is Sami Benchikroon and I'm one of the directors here at ALPSP. And I wanted to wish you a wonderful day, some great sessions that we have ahead of us. And I want to send out a reminder that today is the ALPSP AGM. From 12:05, it's the session 6A, which is this room, I think. Yeah? And now we kick things off with a wonderful a session called 3 months to go, are we ready for OA in 2025? And I want to hand over to Ben Ashcroft to kick us off for this wonderful second day.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you are well rested and sufficiently caffeinated. Welcome to the session 3 months to go. Are we ready for open access in 2025? As we approach the final stretch towards Coalition SE's deadline, publishers across the globe are facing one of the most transformative periods in scholarly communication. The transition to fully open access publishing has been on the horizon for years, but with three months left, yikes, it's ready to take stock, time to take stock. Today, we'll explore how different publishers have navigated this complex landscape. We'll reflect on lessons learned from transitional agreements and consider the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Our panelists, who I'll introduce in a minute, will share their experiences and strategies as they prepare for 2025. After their presentations, we'll open the floor to questions, so I'd encourage you to participate in the discussion afterwards. Our panelists excuse me, are Helen Dobson, who's licensing portfolio specialist at JISC, Chris Bennett, who's the commercial director at Cambridge University Press. We then have a video contribution from Gaynor Redvers-Mutton from the Biochemical Society in Portland Press, who's unfortunately unable to be with us in person today. And she's represented then by Sarah Greaves for the Q&A. And my name's Ben Ashcroft. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at De Gruyter Brill. Okay, well, without further ado then, I'll hand over to Helen to start with the first presentation. Thank you very much. I'm assuming it's, yeah.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Helen Dobson from JISC. I work in the licensing team, as Ben mentioned. And just in case you're not familiar with JISC, we work on behalf of UK universities. We negotiate on behalf of UK universities and colleges. I'm going to talk briefly about the review of transitional agreements that we published earlier this year. Hopefully you are aware already of the review. We think it's one of the most comprehensive of its kind. The purpose really was to provide an evidence base to stimulate discussions, and it seems to have done that, and also to inform decision-making and planning. The analysis in the review covers the period 2018 to 2022, and so therefore represents a snapshot in time. Today I'm going to highlight several key findings and our recommendations for next steps. So firstly, 3 key benefits we noted. This is number 1, our transitional agreements, or TAs, delivered savings and increased efficiencies for our members and simplified compliance with funder policies when there were few alternative routes to immediate open access. In July last year, only 12 of the 38 publishers included in the review offered a compliant green route to open access. Number 2, the TAs increased uptake of open access by UK authors from arts, humanities and social sciences, so disciplines from disciplines typically excluded from APC-based open access due to lack of research funding. They also increased immediate open access opportunities for authors from smaller universities with lower levels of publishing and associated funding. And thirdly, the TAs supported frictionless routes to funder compliance for authors. Of the 93% of UKRI funded articles that have a compliant route to open access, 63% are covered by a TA. And 92% of the agreements present authors with a Creative Commons license as the default option. I'm now moving on to some ongoing challenges. The review found that our TAs delivered sector-level savings of £16.7 million in their first year when compared to the previous year's expenditure on subscriptions and APCs. And our model costs estimated that UK universities have avoided hypothetical costs of £49.1 million in 2024. However, The costs of TAs are still substantial, and UK institutions are becoming increasingly reliant on open access block grants. The diagram on this slide shows the reach of our TAs in 2022. They were designed to transition research from UK universities to open access, and over 39,000 articles were published open access through the TAs in 2022. That's the smallest pink circle in the middle. But the diagram really shows how far there still is to go to achieve a full transition. Over 21,000 articles that were eligible to be published open access under a TA in 2022 weren't. And the larger, darker pink circles include excluded groups such as researchers from health and social care settings and independent researchers. So TAs or alternatives need to be scaled up. I've included some unintended consequences on this slide to flag with you that although the UK is transitioning to open access more effectively than the global average, these are things that concern our members. In particular, the increase in hybrid publishing by UK authors, which we saw overtake fully gold publishing, and also the decrease in green open access. Another concern for our members is the slow rate of publisher portfolios transitioning to full open access. We found that only 3 publishers had flipped more than 10% of the titles to full open access between 2018 and 2022. When we presented this slide to our members, they were very concerned about the slow pace of the transition, particularly for the largest publishers. Limited transparency is another concern. We included some great examples of price transparency from several small publishers in the report, but this is not the norm, with only 9 of the 38 publishers submitting pricing to Coalition S's Journal Comparison Service. The lack of transparency on OA strategies and timelines for the transition to OA is also a problem for our institutions. So looking ahead, our members have raised significant concerns about the affordability and sustainability of agreements based on APCs and article-based models. We've seen increasing reliance on funder block grants to cover the cost of TAs, and there is no guarantee that this source of funding will continue. We made the following recommendations to UK libraries and universities. Firstly, committing to negotiating with vendors who offer affordable and sustainable agreements that provide efficiencies and best value, and who demonstrate a commitment to an OA transition, including transparency about their OA strategy. Secondly, building support internally for alternatives to the current agreements, including non-article or APC-based models. Thirdly, considering divestment from underperforming agreements to free up budget to invest in agreements that are more sustainable and that increase participation in research in an equitable way. Our recommendations to publishers are, firstly, sharing ambitious and proactive open access roadmaps that will scale up OA coverage in an equitable way at both the UK and global level. Secondly, committing to addressing inefficiencies and incentivising open research practices. And thirdly, providing proposals for non-article or APC-based models that are transparently costed and are easy to understand and administer. Finally, we recommend that the sector prioritise the adoption of additional indicators that demonstrate a commitment to equity to build support for alternatives to article or APC-based models. And just in case you're not already aware, the multi-stakeholder Beyond Article-Based Charges Working Group, co-led by my colleague Anna Vernon, has developed an evaluation framework that will be presented next week at the ALPSP Conference. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Ben.
Hello again. I'm going to start with a disclaimer, which is that De Gruyter and Brill are formally together now, and we do have a common commitment to achieving open access for the majority of our portfolios by 2028, but at the moment we have separate strategies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the De Gruyter Transformation Initiative, how it's worked and what the perspective is, but not about Brill, because we still have a lot of work to do in order to stitch those strategies together. And maybe that would make a case study for a future ALPSP conference. Anyway, coming back to De Gruyter, what's the plan? Well, how did we formulate it? What's the approach to forming OA? There were four clear goals that we wanted to achieve with our plan, and all of those are ambitious in their own right. We wanted to find a way of making open access work for humanities and social sciences journals. We wanted to create an equitable model that would allow all of our authors to publish open access. We wanted to accelerate the transformation to open access, very much in the spirit of what Helen's just been presenting. And we wanted to make sure that we had a clear direction of travel for all of our stakeholders, both internal and external. And driving those ambitions, the reason that we set those out were another four factors. We had been coming under increasing pressure from authors, from societies, from editors-in-chief and others around journals. That's very subject-specific. It doesn't work the same across all of the subjects, but it was there. Pressure was also there from consortia and from governments. Policy was moving on. Consortia were telling us that unless we included open access in deals, we weren't going to get renewals. Our competitors were starting to make moves, and those of you familiar with the German market and the abomination that is the Deal project in Germany that's handed a massive market advantage to three players who didn't need it, will know that that was a significant increase in pressure for us. And then finally, internally, we needed to give the organization a clear way forward. We needed to tell all those people through the organization who would support the shift to open access how it was going to work, how workflows were going to change, how systems would need to be adapted. What you won't see on this slide is any reference to the 2025 deadline. A sort of relatively arbitrary 2025 deadline from Plan S wasn't a major consideration for us. Plan S funds Plan S funders fund a very, very small number of articles that we publish, so we didn't feel a particular pressure from that, other than the way it worked, of course, worked out in consortia attitudes. Now, it's fashionable, I think, to say, as a publisher, that open access has always been a priority, but we really did start early. We've been transitioning journals at least since 2013, actively flipping parts of the portfolio via firstly sponsored models, then APC models, where those were appropriate to individual titles. We also experimented with APC-driven transformational agreements, but it quickly became clear that these weren't going to have the required impact. We had a lot of deals. We're pretty proud of the number of deals that we could close globally, but the number of articles published as a result of those remained low, and I'll talk about why in a minute. So that clearly wasn't going to get us to where we needed to be. So from 2021, we started to pilot Subscribe to Open to test the market, to test editor-in-chief and author acceptance, and also understand what S2O would mean for internal systems, for internal workflows, and what support it would need. And the pilots and the experiments helped us to understand the challenges that we faced in transforming the De Gruyter portfolio. It's important to say at this point that the portfolio is 70% humanities and social sciences. We do have some good and important STM journals, but the bulk of the journals can't assume they will receive funding support for APCs because it's just not there for the humanities and social sciences disciplines. We also have an issue with the geographical spread of our portfolio. To put it very simply, we do our subscription business not where our authors are, and if those two things match up, then you don't have the prerequisites for successful transformational agreements. And finally, I think we face the same issue that a number of publishers face, which is that globally it's very far from being a consistent picture for open access, and trying to take account of national policies which influence open access take-up or budgets, and the different speeds of transformation is an extremely difficult thing to do. So how do we progress? Well, when we came to decide what our move was going to be, we were pretty clear about the pros and cons of each model because we tried them out. And it was equally clear that due to the diversity of our portfolio, a single approach wasn't going to work. We have STM journals that function very nicely in an APC model. We have diamond open access journals that are growing great guns and great relationships with the bodies that are supporting those. But for excuse me, for a large part of the portfolio, we realized that none of those two approaches were really going to be appropriate. That led us to look very, very seriously at S2O as potentially the main driver of transforming the portfolio. And in August last year, we made the leap. We announced last August that we plan to use S2O as the major vehicle with which to move our journals to open access by 2028. And we laid out a clear pathway. We did a forecast of which journals we thought were going to be able to move when, and we published that just to increase the pressure on ourselves, and gave ourselves the goal of getting to 90% open access by 2028. As of now, we're on track. We're delighted with the market response to S2O, and the metrics for the journals that we've transformed, and believe me, we watch those obsessively, are very, very good. If we continue to make progress, will depend on that success, the success on a journal level continuing, but also on us being able to organizationally, operationally, maintain the pace alongside everything else that we're doing. So, that's one way of saying this pace is going some for an organization of our size. This puts significant strain on the organization. It requires a lot of the people involved, and it is a significant investment of time and effort. And, I think we're on track at the moment, but there's lots of jeopardy in there, some of which is outside our control. So moving on, what does it actually take to scale? What are those issues that we face? And I just refer to the bubble on the slide there. Transitioning for a publisher, as I'm sure the publishers in the room know, it is not effort or cost neutral. It's an investment in the future, and one makes it consciously. And to give you a little bit of insight into what that's meant for us, it was a 2-year project of strategy development, of really deep analysis of the portfolio and our business, and exploring various options with stakeholders. We redesigned a whole load of workflows and processes, tested them again. Internal training was a massive point. We had to get people on board with this. We had to put journals managers in a position where they could discuss the model in depth with editors-in-chief, and that takes time. We've set ourselves the bar of speaking with every single editor-in-chief or editorial board or society for our journals, and making sure that they are on board with transitioning that journal via S2O or one of the other models before we do anything. And that in itself is a significant effort across 380 journals. So communication was a major thing that we spent time on. And we also devised an entirely new business model for our consortium agreements and institutional agreements, which we include S2O, but also allow us to build in the other open access models that we were using for our journals. So we've had a busy 2 or 3 years running up to that announcement in last August. Another angle on what it takes to scale is what's happening out in the market. And again, it's in the bubble there. There's no consensus about how open access moves forward in the market. It's not just Plan S. Everybody is impatient to achieve our open future. But, where we go, I think there's still lots of open questions. If you just look at what's been happening in the last few months there, the open access world is still messy. There's been a whole load of recent announcements that show geographical diversity of models is still there. APC models are under pressure from some quarters, but they're booming in others. We're still seeing, the danger of the domination of the market by the big players. And that leads us to a whole load of dichotomies. So what works for institutions doesn't always work for publishers, and vice versa in terms of models. The models are still in flux. Diamond, APCs, gold, green, there's no consensus on those. Humanities and social sciences and STM content have different requirements for OA. Models have to be different, I think, in order for them to thrive. And the transition also looks very different depending on whether you're a not-for-profit publisher or a commercial one. One response to those dichotomies, I think, is to suggest that we need to look a little bit differently at the concept of value in an open access world. So usage and article output are probably going to always be central to the currency of the journal's business, but in open access, and particularly in non-open access, non-APC open access, and humanities and social sciences, perhaps we need to start taking other metrics more seriously, such as, to what extent models are community-led, quality, transparency, and sustainability and affordability. And these map, and this is the final point, to some of the key challenges facing institutions and publishers moving to open access. And we see four key ones, or four key buckets here. Sustainability, so the balance between cost on the institutional side and profitability on the publisher side. It's no secret that journals basically fund publishers, they fund books programs. They have to be manageable. One of the criticisms of APC models is that they are cumbersome and time-consuming to manage on both sides. And we have to make sure that models are able to be communicated and also compliant. They have to be inclusive, and in best case, they would also have a significant impact, so enabling transformation at scale and at speed. As of now, we think that S2O offers one of the best approaches to meeting these challenges. We will see as we scale it out, we'll see as we get closer to 2028. Clearly, with us, it's not going to happen by 2025, but is that a surprise to anybody? Don't know. Anyway, thanks for your attention. I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning. Are we ready for OA in 2025? No. There's a little more to it than that. And spoiler alert, some of you have seen some of this before, so my apologies for that in advance. I do think that there is a real chance for a sustainable model for open research, but it isn't going to be this coming year. I'm going to say a little bit about why we think that is at Cambridge. First of all, a bit of a step back. Has open access failed to address the underlying problems of journals publishing adequately? Principally, the glut of material which is being produced because academics are on a hamster wheel of reward and recognition, because there is in some quarters price gouging, because there is not enough money in the system. Have any of those things really been addressed by OA? Arguably not. In fact, at precisely the time when there is egregious predatory publishing behaviour and the real value of quality academic publishing to the scholarly record is more apparent and more important than ever, we are seeing a race to the bottom on integrity driven by volume, and we are seeing serious financial pressures on the entire sector which are actually restraining the process of transformation. These are fundamental underlying problems, and if we don't resolve them together as a sector, we are not going to effect this transformation. In fact, we could load a worse problem on top of the old system, and we must avoid doing that. This has even created additional problems because in a pay-for-publishing world, there are significant issues with access to publishing and equity. This could be a Western, wealthy, high research-driven system to the detriment of much scholarly communication around the world, something else we must and should avoid. However, we have for the last 7 years at Cambridge attempted to address some of these issues, and we're very proud with where we've got to today. At the beginning of this year, and I don't have an update on these numbers quite yet, but we'll have one soon as we tick through our renewals season, 63% of our journal's research content has gone OA. Now, that doesn't directly translate into a number of flipped journals, and I'll come back to that, but that is 63% of the research content within our journals is open access. principally through a gold route, and principally driven by transformative agreements with close to 2,500 institutions around the world and over 600 in North America. And we know that to be the most of any publisher. And that's what we've spent the last 7 years doing, getting to the point where we've got what we consider to be sustainable, transformative agreements in place that will deliver gold publishing. We have launched entirely new journals concepts designed to address specific needs and gaps in scholarly communication in particular areas, and we've also put in a large number of workflow improvements. As Ben said, there is no way that this is a cost-neutral endeavour. Far, far from it. In fact, the scale of investment we've had in this and a couple of other areas of our business has meant that last year we were unprofitable and we will struggle to make a profit this year. These are the harsh facts of the case. Nevertheless, we consider it worthwhile to get to where we need to be, and I'll come to that in a few years' time, so the pain will be worth it for a very, very different future. We've also addressed with a co-funding scheme, partly funded by contributions from our members, our publishing partners and institutional partners, and partly funded by Cambridge, an equity initiative to allow cost-effective journals publishing to be delivered worldwide. So we are funding low-income, low-middle-income countries' research publishing with Cambridge, called the Cambridge Open Equity Initiative. And we've also created Research Open, which is a new model to cover, and for us as a principally HSS publisher, to cover the rump of content, we think around 15% of it, which is going to continue to be read into the future in a sustainable, open way. Any one of these would merit a presentation in themselves, and I'm not going to do that to you, but I can certainly take questions afterwards. The engine of change for this list has been transformative agreements into gold, with tremendous success, as you can see from this heat map. We are truly proud of this and the support we've had from the library community around the world to effect it. However, it is only the first phase. It does give us a roadmap, and you've seen Ben's, here's mine. It gives us a roadmap through to 2027 for 90% of Cambridge's content and list, so I am now translating this into flips, for 90% of our list to be sustainable gold OA. That is predicated on some very significant assumptions that must happen over the next couple of years. However, Ben made this point, we are ahead at the moment of our own targets. Having passed 63% in this year, we will effect over 40 flips for 2024 to 2025. That will be followed by almost 80 flips next year. The following 2 years will see at least 60 per year to give us in 2027 a gold open access list. Great progress, you might think. It's not going to be for 2025, though the Plan S deadline was never ours. However, you might have heard from us, we thought we could do this by 2025, and in practice, we found that that was not possible. So we've had to roll out a bit farther. But this is still very much the game plan. However, at the moment, our cost base exceeds the revenue from transformative agreements alone. Were we to do this now, we would destroy the business. Because as an HSS publisher, we have a very, very long tail of small subscriptions to what ostensibly are quite minor journals, but they are tremendously important to the communities they serve, and those journals are not in a position to migrate yet to a new model. We have to recognise in the process of this that we are likely to lose, according to our own modelling, circa 20% of our subscriptions revenue. That is a huge top-line impact for us of circa 10 million sterling. Our licensing over this period is going to be literally decimated because of the perceived difference in value between paid subscription content and purely open content from the point of view of licensees. And we're already seeing the fall away, as all publishers are, from income streams like Journals Archive now some 50% of what it was annually, and falling. We have to continue to invest to make this work, and as I've suggested, that is no mean feat. We're also a publisher of small, significant to their community, but low output journals. Much of it society-owned, over 60% of the list, and over 60% of the list also humanities and social sciences. It is possible to effect a transition with a portfolio like this, but it is not easy and we cannot do it alone. We also have to take down our cost base by 25%, and I'm pleased to say that the vast majority of our society partners have understood this and worked with us on lowering their cost base too, so that it becomes possible for us to do this together. I can't thank them enough. It is a very, very difficult thing to do when what you aspire to in the first place is a 10% bottom line. We're far from that at the moment. As Ben's also suggested, there is not going to be an even transition. As with everything in this industry, the speed of change is markedly different around the world, and we will see a transition that works in North and West Europe and Australia and New Zealand. The numbers actually stack up, and those regions are, as in our parlance, in balance. Therefore, the amount of publishing happening is supported by the amount of revenue being generated. That is broadly true of the most high output research institutions in North America, South and West Europe, and Asia. But at all levels of those regions below that, there is a fall away with a very, very long tail of current subscription revenue, which will not be transitioned sustainably. Not only that, there are high research output regions such as Japan, which are going to go a very different route from ours because our publishing doesn't track readership in Japan. And we're also going to see China and India, I think, going to quite radically different models, which in India's case will be partly driven by government-sponsored Diamond, partly by APCs, and certainly is going to be strongly APC-driven in China. That's another real challenge for the industry if we are concerned about ramping volume and ramping costs for the community. So fundamentally, we've got to redistribute 30% of our collections revenue globally to get this done. At a consortium level, that is possible, and we've worked with consortia who are able to do it. At the same time, and I've been in some very difficult meetings with consortia and libraries around the world in the last week, we are seeing asks from a number of publishers at the moment. Some of those asks are much greater than ours, and they are happening at a time when the sector is bluntly strapped for cash. It is proving very difficult to have those conversations, even when philosophically there is great support for what we're doing, because our model is about sustainability and equity and unlimited gold publishing, which is something else that we are offering as part of this. We are going to have to do more with less as we see this through. It is possible, but again, Ben's alluded to this, there is never going to be one model. This is how we've characterized it. We've got a core publishing agreement. This is what will replace TAs, pure publishing-driven agreements, open infrastructure, entirely new venues, entirely new models, pushing that cost base down. Some of that is Diamond. Pure gold publishing, some standalone APCs, though we are very, very wary, as I've suggested, about the ramp of volume inherent in APC models, the ramp of cost. Converting the long tail into something, though I hesitate to use the term S2O-like, and our open equity initiative. Across the key regions of the world, we will have to operate a balance of these models for several years in order to make this operate. And there's much, much more that we can all do, but we must do this together as a sector. We can make these commitments, a commitment to unlimited gold publishing, 15% of that cost supporting read content for the communities that need it for the long-term future. Systematic redistribution of revenue to support the overall programme. Significant investments in far better research workflow, and we could be a lot better at that. However, we really need engagement from the community. We need support, even though it is difficult at the moment to do that, to change the model. And we can't do this as one publisher, or even a couple of willing publishers. We need broad acknowledgement of the difficulties and a preparedness to change not only the financial underpinning of these models, but the way the reward and recognition system works in academic institutions, so that there are clear, differentiated routes for the top caliber research publishing and everything else which is going to need a home, but at far less cost, without continuing to pile a load on a system which is creaking to breaking point. We in this room, and others like us, can and must effect this transition. The time to do so is within this decade. If we don't get this across, and we don't get the support that we need, and we can't operate together in a community of interest to do this, open access will have failed to solve the problems that the scholarly communication system is facing. I like to think that that will not be the case, but it hangs in the balance, perhaps not for 2025, but certainly for 2027 to 2028. Thank you. And I should say, sorry, I'm introducing the video, which is Gaynor, who can't be here in person, sadly, so she's going to come in broadcast form to us now.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so sorry not to be there with you today, and hope you're all enjoying a great conference. Me, just to introduce myself, I'm Gaynor Edwards-Mutton, and to tell you a little bit about us. We are Portland Press, wholly owned trading arm of the Biochemical Society. We're an independent, small-scale publisher of 6 journals, one of which has been a fully gold OA journal since 2012, and the other 5 are hybrid titles, 3 of which are review journals. These journal types, plus our size, our scale, our subject area, all dictate the options available to us in transitioning to open. Organisationally, our trustees are the ones who took the decision for us to pursue a committed open science agenda. We've had 5 years to make the transition to full OA since Plan S was announced, and we've done it. JISC's TA report has forensically measured the effects of TAs and concluded that TAs don't look able to succeed in moving to universal OA. So in this presentation, I'm going to give a comparison view. On to the next slide. To set our OA journey in context, we introduced Read and Publish in 2020, a big year for all sorts of reasons. Our Read and Publish was designed to be cost neutral, and we created it alongside a group of like-minded societies formed under the banner of the Society Publishers Coalition. And the model that we created, and most of us have continued to use, was an unlimited, no caps version of the model. And I feel this is significant in the success of its take-up. So I'm going to now take you on to look at some of the results. Next slide. This slide shows our experience of publishing OA over the last 4 years under Read and Publish. The chart on the left shows the growing proportion of OA content that we publish, and on the right, the growing proportion of our institutional income earned from OA agreements. As you'll see from these two charts, we've found it much easier to publish OA content than we have to monetize it through TAs. We currently publish over 70% of our content OA, and despite the really encouraging growth trajectory that we've seen, we've only managed to move away from the heavy reliance on traditional subscription. This year we are earning about 30% of our institutional publishing revenue from transformative OA agreements. Before taking this 70-30 split to another set of data, I'll detour to acknowledge that APC income, of course, has helped us move that content dial. However, the inherent iniquity plus the instability of APCs as a business model led us to seek out alternatives to author-facing OA fees. And from next year, we'll no longer offer author choice OA for a fee in our hybrids. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. But our future financial challenge is best represented on this slide by institutionally funded OA. So I wanted you to see the scale of the challenge to transition that an OA positive society such as ours has. On to the next slide, please. So now to address the GISC report data, and here I will focus on just one set of the data which particularly caught my attention because it focuses on participation and exclusion and allows us to compare our own experience with the collective aggregated data that GISC has really helpfully put together. And just to remind you of what this graphic on the slide is telling us, the pink wider circle of 128,000 articles is the full set of 2022 articles with a UK author, and that could be a contributor or corresponding author. In 2020, we never aspired to covering 100% of UK authors. Our systems were not geared to picking up all contributing authors, and we were explicit that our read and publish deals would only cover corresponding authors for that very reason. 4 years later, and our aspirations are bolder, and more about that later. The next circle picked up by in the GISC data is the UK corresponding authors outside of GISC, and therefore probably not covered by a TA. In GISC data, that cohort is 16%, and in ours, contrastingly, we just have 3%. And we always aspire to include this group of authors. It's principally accounted for in our data by clinician authors. We didn't succeed in signing NHS, and so researchers who work in hospitals are generally not covered. These articles represent research conducted outside universities, and in some disciplines this will be the majority of research. And I think it's worth just mentioning this because we relied strategically so heavily on library consortium, GISC, of course, CALL, TIB, JULAC, many consortium have really contributed to our success story. But I think this number indicates the boundaries of their influence in affecting universal OA. And for us, it called for a way of thinking about forcing participation, if you like, from the kind of institutions that we don't have the same relationship with as we do with the university sector. Finally, there's two smaller circles of GISC libraries choosing not to opt in. In our data, that represents 16%. So this is the available GISC market share that we didn't manage to win over. And that gave us some pause for thought. And so finally, it leaves us with the inner circle, which in our data, contrasting to GISC's, we have 70% of our articles compared with 30% of JISCs that were published OA under a TA. So another 70-30 split. Now I'm going to move on to the next slide. So our answer to the participation gap has been to try to complement what we already do with Read and Publish and to add another business model, which is what we'll be doing next year. Subscribe to Open will join 3 other OA pathways and enable us to offer all authors from any type of institution and any region across all hybrid titles to publish OA without an author fee. When this comes in, we will have completed our transition, and I just want to talk a little bit about what we face post-2025. We will be continuing to rely on the library sector to support us. We now have evidence of the likely size of those who may not opt in, despite the various encouragements of bodies such as JISC and UKRI and others in the UK. And what we see is good deals on offer from society publishers. We still cannot rely on 100% of that market share of the university sector libraries. We need other regions to participate to make Subscribe to Open work. North America at present is starting to back OA agreements, and we're seeing huge growth in that region, but it's still really unclear what will prevail in other parts of the world, principally Asia. And then another point is that the nomenclature around OA publishing is getting more and more confusing. Hybrid, green, and gold all have multiple contextual meanings, and this makes assessments and comparisons really difficult. I just want to highlight one practical way in which we're facing that. We have a real problem if institutions take a stand that they will no longer fund TAs, because we still will have Read and Publish. We use 2 institutional funded OA models. Next year we will have transitioned, so we need to ditch terms which carry any expectation that we haven't yet reached our goal. And obviously TAs in themselves, as everybody knows, are transitional, and so they don't describe an end state. Our OA agreements will need to be judged by a different yardstick and different data sets. Next slide. So I've mentioned 70 plenty of times in this presentation, and it would be remiss if I failed to refer to the 70 years estimated by JISC to achieve full OA based on the trends they charted in their study. Our contrast to that figure isn't 30, it's 0. We're there as of next year, as of the deadline. And so to the question, are we ready? Our answer is yes, we are. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
So now there's an opportunity to ask some questions. We have the panellists here. Sarah, as you know, is representing Gaynor, who can't be with us today. We've got roving mics if there are any questions from the audience, and we also, I think, have opportunity to ask questions via the app, which Mark is monitoring. I need to just shield myself from the light, and I see a lady just to the right there. Thank you.
Good morning. Jessica Mosier with University of Toronto Press. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I have 2 questions. I'll ask them both. Maybe you just answer one, but they're quite different. Yesterday, we had an opening presentation from Jake, which was wonderful, talking a lot about OA and the actual application of OA in Nigeria, which, given that equity is a major driver for OA, he was speaking as a researcher, both a consumer and a contributor, the challenges with OA. So I would just be curious, also looking at enrollment trends in the next 20 years, Africa will be increasingly important for both all publishers. Are there efforts being made to involve more institutions and also more researchers in solving this issue with OA? Would be my first question. Second question, if you can indulge me, is in 3 weeks there's going to be another conference here in Manchester, which is the World Academic Summit. University presidents from all over the world will be here to get their report card on how they are with their rankings. And the thing that feeds that is really the research citations. From what I can see, the only publisher really present there is Elsevier. Are we doing enough as an industry, and if we are, I'd love examples of it, tying the citations that we help produce to the funding that institutions get that drive those rankings? Because I think that's a critical component, and I'm not sure if all university presidents, administrations, librarians are aware of that close connection. I'd be just curious about your response to that.
Thank you. Would any of you like to pick one of those questions, and can we just repeat the one that you're going to choose to talk about, please?
I don't mind giving the first one a go, and we'll come to the second one. So I alluded to the Cambridge Open Equity Initiative. We are trying very hard to address the disparities in global publishing equity that OA arguably is exacerbating at the moment rather than helping to solve. And the mechanisms we have for doing that are through established initiatives like Research for Life, which are now funding publishing rather than for subscriptions, but also our own initiative, which is designed to take some of the revenue that we're generating through our publishing agreements and make that available for open publishing to be done from regions where it wouldn't otherwise be affordable. It's a start. It's very much not an end. And something that we don't want is a white man's burden style of charity in this sector. We need a healthy global research community which is self-sustaining. One of the ways in which I think we can really do that is help to develop, as we do as journals, publishers, research communities, help to foster more affordable publishing mechanisms, help to drive up diamond initiatives, for instance, as long as we know that we have an overall business to help fund those and create venues that are affordable. But there is no one single solution to this, and it's yet another reason why we mustn't have a model which is predicated on pay-per article volume, because it simply is not going to work for issues of global equity. I should also point out, I gave a version of this presentation, longer version of this presentation in Australia and New Zealand towards the beginning of the year. One of the New Zealand librarians rightly pulled me up and reminded me that equity is not just about geography, that there are plenty of great researchers who will struggle under this model in all of our regions and all of our markets, and she made some specific points about Australia and New Zealand which could have been applied to anywhere. So we have very much more to do here, and we mustn't let an irony of the loss of the subscription business mean that there isn't equity in the publishing business. I guess that's a partial answer.
Ben, Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a biochemical society perspective, obviously we're a global organisation looking to represent authors wherever they are, and we're all well aware of the issues that the open access model has created for your diversity, not only of authors but of peer reviewers and editors, and those also engaged in the ecosystem who could help support some of the challenges that we're facing in terms of peer review pressure and managing research integrity. So I think from our side, we're trying to create and have created hopefully a model that allows equity of access and equity to publishing. And will it be the longevity model? Will it last forever? I don't know. I doubt it. I think we're all experimenting with different models and things will come into the market. But I think we're all increasingly aware that no matter where you are, what you're researching or who you are, you should have the opportunity to not only read the content but publish in the journal that suits you. So I think as a society and an organisation, we're continuing to develop that.
Thank you. There were a few other hands up. I can see one right at the back, and then I'll come to you, Anthony.
Tasha Mellins-Cohen from Counter, but I'm actually asking this question specifically as an OA consultant. Following on from Sarah's comment about this is probably not the final form that the Biochemical Society will follow, I was wondering if Ben and Sarah might talk to the recent news from IWA about moving from subscribe to open to what I would call more subscribe to publish. I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Ben, do you want to take that?
Yeah, that was going to come up, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that moment was always going to come. Right? There have been relatively few journals that have gone back behind the paywall from S2O, and you know, at some point, we were going to have this moment. I think there are specific reasons why it hasn't worked for IWA to the extent that they hoped. Perhaps they've had a change of leadership as well, so perhaps it's also signifying a slight change of philosophy on their end. The major reason they quoted, I think, was China, and China is very much a challenge for S2O. We are actually quite optimistic at the moment that we will be able to establish it in the Chinese market. I think it depends on who you're talking to, how you involve various stakeholders there, and what form the model takes. But you know, Chris mentioned the same thing that I did. The variety of different situations and different speeds and different models being used globally does make it a really, really significant challenge to establish any one model for moving to OA. And S2O, I think, is coming up against that in the Chinese or Asian context. IWA have pulled you know, that conclusion from it. I think it's an interesting approach. We'll see how they get on with it. We had always thought that, you know, potentially there may be special issues of an S2O journal that might be APC funded, for example. That was not something we've done, but it's something we've discussed internally. So maybe models come together at that stage. I think it's early days, and we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah, and thanks, Tasha. I think from a Biochem SOC perspective, S2O feels for us the right model to step forward with in the space we're in, with the deadlines ahead of us and our desire to be a fully OA publisher. For Portland Press and the Biochem SOC, you know, it's also about taking a step back and going, what does this mean for us as an organisation going forwards? Something that a lot of societies are addressing. So it's not just what model or journey do we go on to ensure our open research sustainable future, but it's like, what does that publishing model look like within the context of our society and how we serve our members and how we serve those who rely on us as a membership organisation, which publishing is obviously a strong financial part. So I think S2O for us feels like the right step. It's the right model out there. We think it can be equitable. We've had good uptake and good interest. And for us, it's the right next step. Where we will all be in 5 years, I don't think we know now. But right now, S2O feels like the right step for us.
Thank you. Can we get a mic to Anthony, please, at the front here?
I think it's polite. Sorry, is it on? Yeah? Yeah. I think it's polite to stand up. If I fall over because of my arthritis, I hope you all understand. Anthony Watkinson, University College London. I'm using this particular affiliation for this purpose because I am a researcher, primarily. And, okay, my question is, I think Ben and Chris have both mentioned this, that something has to be done. And so did this plenary speaker, and mentioned ALPS in this connection. And I don't know if you have a view, any of you, of what ALPS can do or should do, let's put it that way, / as it were.
Thank you. Go on, Chris, you know first.
Thank you, both. I talked about a community of interest. What better way than through the industry bodies that serve us so well to make the connections we need to start to address these problems? I mean, clearly, there needs to be leadership here. We cannot do this singly. We've got to come up with a set of models that work without collusion, I'll hastily add, in order to have a really robust, healthy scholarly comms ecosystem. I do think that's possible, but at the moment what's happening is piecemeal. And we've got to get ourselves organised because, and this was true for many of you who are at the UP Redux conference. There are so many of us who see the same value add. We might be going about it in different ways, but of course, we do add a tremendous amount to the integrity of the scholarly record. That's something that, when we're challenged, we come back to again and again, and that is recognised in the work that we do. That is of such value that it's a common denominator that we can use to stand behind and say, we need to do things differently, and we need university leadership, fundamentally, to listen. And Jessica's point, I think, was great on that. So I will answer that question. We are not doing enough to engage university leadership. We are not doing enough to engage researchers. There is a role there. And it's an irony when we have so many touch points with researchers as publishers, and we're all happy to speak for them, and the funders are all happy to speak for them, but we very rarely get their voices heard. So let's do something about that.
Thanks, Chris. We are actually really up against time now, so obviously the panel are going to be around for the rest of the day. I'm shooting off, but you want to talk to these guys, not so much me. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for engaging with our session this morning. I understand there's coffee break now for half an hour, and then the sessions begin at 10:30. There's a session in this room about the value of OA books, and the session next door is about India Rising. And with that, we'll say thank you very much. Good morning.